On May 3, 1968, Braniff International Airways Flight 352 took off into the Texas sky, carrying 85 souls, including a coffin destined for a grieving family. What happened next was a terrifying lesson in human error, nature's power, and the limitations of technology. Today, we're going to piece together, minute by minute, why this flight ended in disaster and why the pilots didn't listen. This is a story of misjudgments, outdated technology, and one of the oldest cockpit voice recordings ever discovered. The flight and its crew. Flight 352 began as a routine journey. The plane was a Lockheed L-188 Electra, a 4-engine turboprop first introduced in the late 1950s. Known for its speed and reliability compared to older piston planes, the Electra was a pilot favorite. However, it was also the subject of tragic incidents that gave it a shaky reputation. By 1968, only 170 Electras had been built, and Braniff operated 11 of them. Captain John Phillips, a veteran of nearly 11,000 flight hours, had flown the Electra for 4 years. His co-pilot, 32-year-old First Officer John Foster, was relatively new to the plane, with only 143 hours in the Electra. Rounding out the crew was 28-year-old flight engineer Donald Crossley, with roughly 1,000 flight hours. Together, they commanded the aircraft registered as N9707C, a 1959 model that had already seen 21,000 hours of flight. The flight itself was scheduled from Houston to Memphis, with stops in Dallas, Tulsa, Fort Smith, and Little Rock. On board were 80 passengers, 2 flight attendants, the 3-member flight crew, and chillingly, a coffin. The plane carried the body of a woman who had died of cancer, being transported to Tulsa for her family to receive. Despite minor delays on the ground, Flight 352 took off from Houston's William Hobby Airport at 4:11 p.m., bound for Dallas. The sky overhead looked relatively calm, but the pilots were unaware of a violent storm brewing ahead. The meteorology of disaster. To understand what happened, we need to understand the Texas sky on that day. Texas, geographically, sits at a climatic crossroads. The western regions are arid, while the east is humid and heavily influenced by the Gulf of Mexico. On May 3rd, a cold front from Canada was sweeping south, colliding with warm, humid air from the Gulf, a perfect recipe for thunderstorm formation. Thunderstorms form when 3 elements meet: lift, moisture, and an unstable atmosphere. Warm, humid air rises, condenses, and grows into towering cumulonimbus clouds. These clouds can reach tens of thousands of feet, forming an anvil at the top known as the tropopause. Inside these clouds, powerful updrafts and downdrafts collide, creating violent turbulence, rain, hail, and even tornadoes in extreme cases. On the day of Flight 352, the storm was organized as a squall line, a long, narrow band of violent thunderstorms stretching across central Texas. Meteorological records indicate the storm had begun forming several days prior, gradually moving southward. By mid-afternoon, weather stations in Waco, Dallas, and Tyler reported lightning, broken clouds, rain showers, and growing thunderstorms in the path of Flight 352. Although the crew was briefed with weather updates, no formal, comprehensive briefing had been given. Pilots often rely on past experience, radar, and personal observation, and in this case, they were misled into believing a safe corridor existed to the west. The cockpit voice recorder reveals all. Here's where the cockpit voice recording becomes invaluable. Released publicly in April 2023 after being lost for decades, it captures the last moments before disaster. The pilots believed there was a safe passage through the storm to the west. A dangerous misjudgment. Flight controllers on the ground, including one named Glenn Wilson, had advised deviations to the east, where other aircraft were safely navigating the squall line. However, Flight 352 received clearance to head west. The pilots executed the small left turn, unknowingly steering directly into the most violent part of the storm. Captain Phillips even made a calm announcement to passengers, attempting to downplay the storm's severity. The cockpit chatter, juxtaposed against the violence awaiting them, makes the recording chilling. Just minutes later, the aircraft entered the heart of the storm, where turbulence escalated beyond anything they had anticipated. Technology's limitations. The Electra's onboard weather radar gave pilots a false sense of security. Unlike modern color displays, the 1960s radar was grainy, monochrome, and prone to misinterpretation. The radar was slightly tilted upward, exaggerating lighter areas and making the storm appear less severe. Even worse, hail and frozen precipitation often reflected poorly on the radar, leaving pilots unaware of the storm's true intensity. Investigators later determined that Flight 352 was flying directly into a hailstorm, a detail the pilots did not fully recognize. Had the crew heeded the controller's advice and observations from other flights, they might have diverted safely. Instead, a combination of limited technology, human error, and overconfidence in their instruments set the stage for catastrophe. The final moments. The cockpit voice recording captures the rapidly deteriorating situation. The plane began to experience extreme turbulence, forcing Captain Phillips to attempt a maneuver he had been trained to avoid. Standard protocol dictated maintaining a straight and level attitude in severe turbulence, but the captain initiated a 180-degree turn. The Electra's right wing, under immense stress, flexed beyond its structural limits. Cracks appeared along the leading and trailing edges. In a matter of seconds, the right wing detached. Fuel tanks ruptured, igniting a fireball that engulfed the aircraft as it plummeted toward the ground. The right horizontal stabilizer soon failed, striking the tail while the fuselage continued its final descent. Flight 352 crashed near Dawson, Texas, destroying a barn on impact. There were no survivors. The only intact body was that of the deceased passenger in the coffin, shielded from the destruction. The force of the crash left human remains unrecognizable, and the local community immediately mobilized to assist in the aftermath. The heroic response of Dawson, a small Texas town, became the front line in the tragedy's aftermath. Striking telecommunications workers returned to duty to manage phone lines. Residents brought blankets, quilts, and supplies to help secure human remains. Local schools converted gyms into temporary morgues. Families of the deceased were housed, fed, and comforted by a community united in grief and compassion. Despite the horror, the people of Dawson displayed extraordinary humanity. Their efforts remain a significant part of the town's history, memorialized to this day. Investigation and lessons learned. The National Transportation Safety Board, NTSB, conducted a thorough investigation, focusing on the in-flight breakup and structural failure. Early speculation blamed lightning, but investigators confirmed the primary cause was the storm and extreme turbulence. The cockpit voice and flight data recorders provided critical insight, illustrating the chain of errors leading to disaster. Key recommendations followed. Thunderstorms should be avoided by at least 20 miles. Onboard weather radar should be used solely for storm avoidance, not navigation through storms. Lockheed Electras required additional structural inspections. The lessons from Flight 352 reshaped aviation safety protocols, emphasizing the dangers of thunderstorms and the limits of pilot perception and technology. The incredible story of the lost CVR. Perhaps the most remarkable part of this story isn't the crash itself, but the cockpit voice recording's journey. Initially archived by the NTSB, it required a local recording studio, Sellers Studios in Dallas, to be played back. The studio kept the tape long after the investigation, but when the business closed in 1982, the recording was forgotten, buried among old music tapes. Decades later, in 2023, a local radio presenter discovered the CVR in a Texas barn. It was passed down to David Wilson, the son of air traffic controller Glenn Wilson, who worked to remaster the recording. Finally, the world gained access to this haunting glimpse into Flight 352's final moments. The story of Braniff Flight 352 is a chilling reminder of nature's power, human error, and the fragility of technology. It's a tragedy that could have been avoided, but instead serves as a critical lesson in aviation history. The bravery of the Dawson community and the perseverance of investigators and record keepers ensured that this story, though tragic, is not forgotten. If this video left you stunned, don't forget to subscribe, hit the bell, and comment below. There's more disaster history to uncover, more lessons to learn, and more untold stories from the skies.